So tonight for our drosh, we're going to have a conversation. I thought about what it would be like to speak to many years of the LGBTQIA community. And so as our ensemble is going to sit down, I'm going to ask Jonathan Bramfman to join us up here. Thank you. You can come and sit right here. And also B.J. Rolfe to join us. Welcome. And of course, Rabbi Jason Rodich, who also happens to be very gay.
Don't tell them.
After all these years. Come on
We
up.
also, we are representing different generations up here. We had a queer teen, and then they could not come at the last minute. So I want to just apologize that we don't have a teen rep up here. If there's a random queer teen in the room that feels like joining us at the last minute with no prep, come on up. We totally welcome you, but no pressure.
Well, I will say that our queer teen asked permission if they could go to the Trans March, and we did support them in going to the Trans March. So thank you, Cantor. So I'm going to start with my friend B.J. Rolfe, Barbara Josephine Rolfe, avid Torah student, member of Temple Emanu-El since 1997?
Yes.
Okay,
Well, I started coming in
1995, but became a member in 1997. As we spoke the other day, you are now officially a queer elder member. Welcome to Temple Emanu-El. And I have to say that it's also a beautiful anniversary because you chose Judaism 25 years ago. And
I don't think this, how do I make it work? This is beyond my technical capability. I see. Okay, yes.
so 25 years ago, and I was so impressed because I just joined the temple a year before you chose to become Jewish, and you made an audacious move and you chose the name Pua, I remember, one of the midwives in the story of Exodus. I will never forget that.
I asked if you would be
Close,
on my
close,
Beit
close,
Din.
close.
And I asked if you would be on my Beit Din, and I was honored that you did. Yes, I chose the name Pua for a couple of reasons. As you probably all know, she has uncertain identity. Is she or is she not really a Hebrew? All my questions about converting, I identified with that. But even more so, Pua and her friend Shifra refused to kill the firstborn children. And so she was really defined by civil disobedience and pushing back against authority. And I identified with that a lot. Mm-hmm. And it's a funny name, Pua. And so I've just always been very happy. And when we get to Shemot, I always celebrate Shifra and Pua.
Yeah, your name is in there. Professor Jonathan Bramfman, to my right, your left, is also a member of Temple Emanu-El, professor of gender, sexuality, race, and Judaism at Stanford University.
Really?
Yes. And the author of an amazing kids book called You Be You, The Kid's Guide to Gender, Sexuality, and Family, published both in 2 languages, English and Yiddish.
Good for you.
It's pretty amazing. And he is the Eli Reinhard Postdoctoral Fellow at the Taube Center for Jewish Studies. And so it's fabulous to have you here with us.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
So I wanted to, of course, as you know, Rabbi Jason Rodich, who I have to say, I'll just personalize this, which is in 1997 when I was hired as the first out lesbian member of Temple Emanu-El. It was 1997 in San Francisco. So think back 26 years ago. And just before the service, I was talking to our beloved member, Rita Semmel, who's been a San Franciscan for over 100 years. And she said, Rita, I'm speaking about you. Rita said, nobody ever talked about that when I was growing up. And so we think about, well, 100 years is a long time ago, except Rita's alive today. She was alive then. It was verboten. You did not talk about gay people. They didn't exist. And so when Rabbi Rodich spoke about the complexity, and today there's still so many complexities and there's so much difficulty in being out and loud and proud in being gay, especially for queer youth. I just think that it's amazing to think of how far we've come, but how far we have to go. So when I was hired in 1997, a letter went out to the congregation saying that I was joining with my wife and our child, and for the most part, people were fine, but there were two reactions, two families that came to the senior rabbi. The first family said, "It's a terrible mistake, worst role model for children. Keep her out of the religious school, whatever you do. We do not want a homosexual rabbi with the kids. So keep her away from the kids, just put her up on the bima." And the other family said to him, we don't want to see her on the bima. She is a terrible role model. Put her in the religious school. So there's longer stories about those two families, but I will say, when I fast forward to when we found Rabbi Jason Rodich, we were explicitly looking for more queer rabbis, and what year was that?
2015.
2015. And so from 1997 to 2015, so much changed in terms of the rabbinate. When Rabbi Angel and I were ordained just a few years apart, there were very few out queer rabbis. And so I think that the congregation in San Francisco has grown very much in the last quarter century. Professor Jonathan Brampton, tell us a little bit about the book and also your focus on Jewish and queer identity.
Sure. So the book, as you mentioned, is called UBU, The Kid's Guide to Gender, Sexuality, and Family. The cover says it's for ages 7 to 12, but I wrote it also for folks of all ages who maybe need a gentle introduction and welcome to these topics. And it not only explains the full spectrum of LGBTQ identity, but also how those identities can intersect with skin color and gender and social class and disability to expose all of us to different types of inequality, privilege, oppression, and how children can understand those topics in a clear way and try to do something about it within their own worlds, whether in school or with their families.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And yesterday or the day before, whenever it was, we spoke a little bit about what you see as that real intersection between queerness and Jewish identity.
Sure. I always say growing up Jewish was great practice for being gay, because they're both invisible identities, but other people will try to figure you out, and you're trying to figure out who's on your team. And the same parts of the country don't like you, and the same people are trying to convert you, and you sometimes navigate similar decisions about monitoring your environment to decide what to wear, what to say, what slang to use, how to signal your identity or hide it. And so I always say, even though, of course, being straight and Jewish is not the same as being gay or trans, for folks here who are straight and Jewish, first of all, it's okay that you're straight. We accept you as you are. And we're sure you have many redeeming qualities. For folks who are straight and Jewish, you can use your encounters with anti-Semitism as a kind of window or bridge or form of empathy to have some resonance with what gay and trans people are experiencing. And hopefully that can be a way of both feeling motivation to stand up against transphobia and homophobia, and also having insight about how to make that challenge.
Let me say one other thing about that, actually, because I've thought about this. I think another thing the identities have in common, especially as younger folks, is histories of genocide or histories of death. Those of us that came up after AIDS was a death sentence, at least in this country. And those of us that are inheritors of the Holocaust, I see that trauma playing out in different ways, but there's a parallel that I know I feel in both contexts.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when I think about the span of time, I'm going to turn back to BJ for a moment. So BJ shared with me a few days ago a photo, it's okay if I share that, a photo of her wife Sheila's, I was going to say, your wife Sheila's synagogue in the UK, your wife Sheila's church in the UK.
Yeah. In fact, it's the vicar at the Anglican Church of England in her little village in Northumberland but my partner is Catholic, so that's not her.
So you're really a mixed marriage.
Yeah, yes, very mixed marriage. However, the vicar in the little village is trans, and Vicar Diana is, the first part of her life was as a woman. She was an officer in the British military. She's well over 6 feet tall, and she wears her women's clothing, and she's just very out. And she is a wonderful vicar. As I said to you, Rabbi, like the best of you, she can take a very mundane moment and transform it to something holy. And I feel that's a real gift. And the uptight British, they hardly blink an eye. If they have a problem with it, they just shuffle off to another church. And she's a wonderful, wonderful vicar. Also, from a historic perspective, I'm not as old as Rita Semmel, but I did grow up in a time when don't say gay, and it was truly illegal.
Here in San Francisco.
I mean, in the United States. We are so lucky to be alive now in this country, because in the 50s, it was a pathology. It was perverts. And I laugh at you being from Stanford, because I came out in '65, and I knew this. They say it's wrong, but this is right, and just don't get caught. It was only when I got down to Stanford and I met a graduate student who was writing her paper in abnormal psychology about homosexuality that my lights went off, and it was the first other lesbians I ever met who were not in my bed with me. And so that was a big, big deal, because that was in the early 70s. And then, thank goodness, civil rights, gay rights, women's rights, it all opened up. And I feel very lucky to be alive now. However, and good for those trans kids being down there, because as we know, the rights they give us, they take away from us. And that's what we're acknowledging today. It was just a year ago they took away women's right to choose. And so it's not only the trans youth who are under siege. I think we all have to be ever, ever vigilant.
I'm going to give Rabbi Jason Rodich, I guess the last word of our conversation is, you're returning home to the Midwest. And this country is in so many ways different than when you arrived here in 2015.
Yeah.
So you've only been a rabbi for less than a decade. You were ordained in 2014?
Yeah.
So it's coming up on 1 decade. Can you tell us in your own perspective rabbinically what you see having changed since you entered HUC, and give us a little word of hope as we're in this transitional moment where rights are being taken away, but we are still here and we're still queer?
When I entered HUC, and even when I moved to San Francisco, it was sort of, things were taken for granted in a way that was in some ways good, because, it was the good old Obama years and things were looking good. But we also, I think, lost touch with a kind of collective ability to stand up and to assert ourselves, to fight for justice. And I don't wish a single thing about the past, 7, 8 years that have been hard on any of us, but look what we've built together in response. I have seen this very sanctuary filled to the brim multiple times as we've come together to respond to hate. Been a home for San Francisco, right? Do you remember after the Pittsburgh shooting? You couldn't even find an empty seat in here, interfaith community filling this room. After the Orlando terrible shooting in the gay nightclub, we had tons of elected officials come stand in solidarity with us on Friday night services as we in this congregation held vigil. So it's a hard moment. And to suggest otherwise would be naive. But I think we've learned or remembered how to hold together and fight for something.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I hope you've enjoyed our conversation tonight. I want to thank Professor Ranfman and B.J. Rolfe, and they will still be with us in the congregation to answer any questions afterwards. But, I appreciate all of you being here, and if you're here and you're here for Pride Shabbat, think about how you can continue to be an ally, because we have come a long way, and we have a long, long way to go, even here in San Francisco. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.